Assalamu alaikum everyone. In today's topic, we will discuss about FortiGate firewall deployment in Azure Cloud. In my last lecture, we had discussed about how to deploy a FortiGate firewall in an active passive mode with a load balancer. But in today's lecture, I am going to explain you how to deploy a FortiGate firewall in an active passive mode without a load balancer. And this type of deployment is also called Unicast HA deployment for FortiGate. So let's discuss the design first, then I'll show you how to deploy in Azure Cloud. In this design, the one FortiGate firewall will act as a primary node and the other FortiGate firewall will act as a secondary node. If any traffic would like to go to the internet, the primary firewall will be responsible to forward the traffic. HA configuration will be synchronized via port 3, which will be acting as a HA port and heartbeat port. And let me tell you one more important point regarding the HA. There will be a configuration synchronization but except virtual IPs and static routing. The static routing and the virtual IPs, there will be no synchronization between primary and secondary firewall. You have to configure it manually because both firewall has a different IP schema, but the other configuration will be synchronized each other. Let me discuss some failover scenarios. In this diagram, let's suppose you have configured a site-to-site VPN in your FortiGate firewall and your data center, which is your on-prem. So in that case, you will configure the site-to-site VPN between your data center and your FortiGate firewall, which is in Azure Cloud. So this public IP address, it will be mapped with a primary firewall. And similarly, there will be a separate out-of-band management for both firewall. So you can say this, for this deployment, you need 3 public IP address. One for the management of firewall A, one will be for management of firewall B, and the other will be a cluster IP address. Now, in this case, FortiGate firewall A is a primary firewall. Now, let's suppose if FortiGate firewall A is shut down, so what will happen? Once the FortiGate firewall A will shut down, you can see in this diagram, the cluster IP is associated with the primary IP address and the UDR for internal network is 2.4, which is a internal IP address of FortiGate firewall, this one. If the failover will trigger, the FortiGate call an API to the Azure cloud. So once the API will call, FortiGate tell to the Azure cloud that please associate the cluster IP with my secondary IP address. Similarly, with the help of API, we will change the UDR. Before the UDR was 2.4. Now with the help of the API, we will tell to the Azure cloud that please change the UDR from 2.4 to 2.5. These two parameters will be changed by using API, and I'll show you how to configure the API in my same lecture once I will configure the FortiGate firewall. And there is some disadvantage for this design, and of course there is an advantage as well. So let's discuss the advantage first. Like if you would like to select this design, then there is no additional load balancer. It means there is no extra hops. So it means performance wise the delay will be minimum as compared to the LB design. But in this design, the cluster IP and the UDR, once the failover will trigger, it will take minimum of 120 seconds to change. So what does it mean? It means that whenever there is a failover, your complete traffic will be down for minimum of 120 seconds. And let me tell you that this value depends on Azure API script. This is not a limitation of FortiGate firewall. This is a limitation of Azure cloud because the Azure API script takes around minimum 120 seconds. And if the UDR of the FortiGate firewall contains more list, time will be increased. So this is the disadvantage of this design. So now let me show you how to configure this design. I just copied this template link on my website, Google Chrome. So once it will open, so before entering the details, as per my suggestion, what you need to do, just go to edit and change the VM image, because as per my experience I have seen that the latest 6.4 version has some errors. So go here. So here you need to change 6.0.2.3. This is a JSON template. So once you change this, click save. Now create a new resource group FGEXT2. Give the same name as mentioned here, West Europe. Give the username and password. Give the prefix. So I have given the username and password and then prefix. So select from here 6.2.3. The image is BYOL. The instance type will be F4. We don't need to change this public IP. It will be a new IP addresses. This will be a cluster management public IP. This is a name for the cluster IP address. So we need to enter a resource group. So FGEXT2, FGEXT2. Copy the resource group and enter here. Same, enter here. So you need to check what is your VNet name in which you would like to deploy the. So you need to check the VNet name of your existing setup. Copy the name of that VNet. So once you copy, click save and check the resource group of that VNet and copy it and save it here. The address space of my VNet is 192.168.0.0, so I will copy the address space here, and now I have already made some subnets for my firewall. You need 4 subnets for the firewall deployment. So this will be outside interface. This will be the subnet of the outside interface, and this is my outside subnet, and this is the subnet prefix. Similarly, I will add the transit subnet. The transit subnet is this one, and I need to enter the first IP of my firewall. So this will be my inside IP of firewall A, and automatically once we deploy the template, it will take another IP which is will be 11.5. So I will add the HA, and then I will add the management subnet. So once we enter the management subnet, you don't need to add protected subnets, so you can remove it, it's optional. So just verify what you have given it here. 6.2 name, cluster IP, and everything is there now. So you just need to click agree and then purchase. So once you click on agree, it will validate the configuration thing. So now the deployment is in progress. So now you can see that deployment is completed. So go to the resource. You can see that it has installed FortiGate A and FortiGate B. So our next step is to access the firewall. So we will copy the public IP and we will access the firewall. So now we will give the username and password. So once we give a username and password, it will ask to upload a license. So we will upload a license file and it will go for the license validation and it will reboot. Still it is validating the license. So initially you will see here. So let me show you the interfaces. So these are the interfaces. This is a public interface of FortiGate A and the public IP is mapped with this interface. This public IP is actually a cluster IP. So once the failover will trigger, so we will use the API call to shift this public IP to the secondary firewall. So right now in FortiGate B NIC1 there is no public IP. So once we configure the failover, it will shift the public IP here. So let me show you again the interfaces. This is the inside interface of FortiGate firewall. This will be a HA interface and this will be a management interface. So you can see that the management interface is also has the public IP addresses. As I told you that we need total 3 public IP addresses. So one will be for management for FortiGate A, and one will be for management for FortiGate B, and the one will be a cluster IP for the public IP address. This IP address will be associated to the outside interface of FortiGate-A. Once the failover will happen, it will shift to the FortiGate-B through API call. So let me check again. The reboot is done. So the reboot is done. I am accessing this firewall with a cluster IP address. So right now I can only access the FortiGate firewall A. So now once I configure the API and HA, I will be able to access the FortiGate A and FortiGate B. So now I will show you how to configure the API for SDN connector. So before creating a SDN connector, let me just repeat the steps. In a first step, we have created 5 subnets. In step 2, we have opened a ARM template, custom ARM template. In custom ARM template, I have changed the firmware version to 6.2.3 because of the existing firmware 6.4 has some issues related to the Azure Fabric connector. And in the third step, once I have given all the parameters, I have click on the deploy button, and after that I wait for 10 minutes. In step 4, I have accessed the firewall using cluster IP address, and then I have activated the license, and after the activation the firewall has been rebooted. So for step 6, before creating a SDN connector, you need to request Microsoft Team to create a AD service. This AD service is an app registration, and it will give you an information for tenant ID, subscription ID, client ID, and client secret keys. So for the SDN connection, these 4 informations are required to configure the SDN connector. So we need to request the Microsoft team to provide this information. So let's start how to configure the SDN connector. So before configuring the SDN connector, let me explain you the commands. This is the SDN connector configuration, in which we are configuring the tenant ID, client ID, subscription ID, and client secret key. With the help of these details, you will be integrate your FortiGate firewall with the Azure API script. So the purpose for this configuration is to tell the Azure that if the primary firewall is FortiGate A, please associate the cluster public IP with FortiGate A interface NIC1, and the default route for the FortiGate firewall will be 192.168.11.4. I'll show you this default route. So currently the route table name is FortiGate default ARP table, and the route entry is to default. Let me show you these 2 entries. If you go to the route table, so this is the route table when we have created when we have deployed the FortiGate firewall. By default it will give this route table name, and this route table entry is equal to default. If FortiGate firewall A is active, so the next hop must be 11.4, and if the failover will trigger, the next hop must be 11.5. So this is what we need to tell here. So we are trying to tell through the API script. Similarly, I will copy this for FortiGate Firewall B, and I will just change the name of FortiGate Firewall B here with the capital B. And anything else that I need to change? Yes, I need to change the IP address as well, because the inside interface of FortiGate IP address for the second firewall is 11.5. Let me show you. For the FortiGate inside interface, the IP address is 11.5. This is the inside interface of FortiGate firewall, and you can also see it from here. The inside interface of FortiGate A is 11.4. So now I will configure this parameter on my FortiGate firewall A, and then I will access the second firewall, and then I will configure this parameter on FortiGate firewall B. So I have configured this parameter. Now I will verify config SD the system SDN connector show full. You can see that this is my configuration, so I can verify from here. So my fabric connector If it is configured properly, it must show up. It is showing down. So now you can see that the fabric connector is up. So similarly, I will take an access for FortiGate Firewall B. So by default, only SSH and HTTPS is enabled on only outside interface. So now I have accessed the secondary firewall. The reason why I am accessing from FortiGate Firewall A, because right now there is no management route for the FortiGate Firewall B and A. So only public IP is currently, the cluster public IP is only associated with the FortiGate Firewall A. So I will copy the commands for FortiGate Firewall B. That's it. To verify, config system, SDN connector, show full configuration. So this I have configured. So now my next step to configure the HA between FortiGate Firewall B and Firewall A. So let me show you how to configure it. So now before configuring HA, we need to change the mode of all the firewall, the interface mode from DHCP to static. So let me access the firewall. This is my FortiGate A. I will copy the interfaces from here. 11.4 is my internal IP address for port 2. Similarly, I will copy for port 3. It is good practice that do it one by one in case if you will get an error, so you can manage it. You can see that you get an error in this command. So let's see what type of error. Okay, that's it. And then next, once it is done, you need to click on end and you need to configure the static routing for the default route. I will copy this and then end. So once I configure it, so you have observed that still I didn't change port 1 from DHCP to static, because just for the precautionary purpose I will do it in last. So now I'm changing the interface from static to, that's it. So I'm still able to get access via port 1. So now port FortiGate Firewall A interface configuration is done, and now I have to configure the FortiGate B. So to configure the FortiGate B, I have to access the FortiGate Firewall. This is my FortiGate Firewall B. Similarly, I will do it one by one. FortiGate Firewall interface IP address is .5 and the Firewall A IP address is .4. I will make an alias for my understanding. Enter, and finally I will give a route. In Azure Cloud, the first IP address of any subnet is the default gateway. That's why I have given here the default gateway is 10.1, and finally I will give the interface port 1 as an static. So that's it. So after changing interfaces, I have to configure it HA. So let me show you how to configure the FortiGate firewall for HA. I have already created a template. So I will copy this on FortiGate Firewall A, and similarly I will configure on FortiGate Firewall B. So after the configuration on FortiGate Firewall A and Firewall B, let me log in on FortiGate Firewall A. Then we will see the HA status. So let's check. So you can see that the second firewall is came up and it is successfully synchronized as well. So you can see that the status of fabric connector is up. So now you can access both firewalls simultaneously using the out of band management IP address, which is on interface 4. So this will be an IP address for the FortiGate Firewall A. Now I am closing the cluster IP and let me access the FortiGate Firewall B. So let me type username and password. So this is FortiGate Firewall A and this will be FortiGate Firewall B. Currently this is our master device and this is FortiGate Firewall B and this is acting as the slave device. So as let's check the SDN connector on the secondary device. Let me resync. So you can see that both fabric connectors on both devices are up. So now I will show you how the route table and the cluster IP changes when the failover will occur. So let me go to the route table. Currently you can see that for default route is towards 11.4. So with the help of the API, once the failover will trigger, the FortiGate will send the API call to the Azure cloud to change this IP address 11.4 to the 11.5, and 11.5 is an IP address of the secondary firewall. So let me show you how to do it. So before doing it, I have to do a failover. Let me access the firewall. I will show you the logs during a failover trigger. This is the firewall B. I will run the command diagnose, debug, enable, diagnose, debug, application AZ-99. This command will show you the live logs once I fail over the firewall. So you will see the logs which is related to the API. So I'll show you. So just note down that before doing the failover, here the IP address is 11.4, and let me open the other duplicate session. I will show you the public IP as well. So right now you can see that this IP address is associated with FortiGate Firewall A interface, and currently there is no public IP associated with this interface. So once the failover will trigger within 3 minutes, this IP will be shifted to the FortiGate Firewall B. So let me shut down the firewall. I am turning off the FortiGate Firewall A. So now I will show you the logs plus the IP address. So let me go to the route table. You will see after a couple of minutes this will be changed. So let's see. You can see that the status is in progress. It will take normally around 2 minutes, and it also depends on the number of public IP addresses. You can see that still the status is in progress. API call is in progress. FortiGate, let me tell you one thing. FortiGate already sent the API call, but from the Azure side, still it is not reflected. So we have to wait for 2 minutes normally. Once we get the status succeeded, we will see that the route is changed. Let me refresh. Still 11.4. So now you can see that status is succeeded. So now let me go back and let me refresh this page. You can see now the route is changed. Now it is 11.5. Before it was 11.4. And let me show you the public IP address as well. You can see that now currently there is no public IP is associated with outside interface of FortiGate Firewall A. Now let me show you the FortiGate Firewall B. So currently the cluster IP is associated with the FortiGate Firewall B. So these two IPs, the cluster IP address and the route table, is changed because of the API call. So I hope guys this video would help you in the deployment of HA Unicast FortiGate firewall deployment. So if you like my videos, Kindly subscribe my channel and don't forget to click on the bell icon. Thank you so much.